That night at the country club, my future grandson-in-law's father called my grandson a worthless tradesman in front of 40 people. I set down my fork. I did not say a single word. People mistake quiet women for soft women. That has always been a useful mistake. My name is Margaret Sullivan. I'm 63 years old, and I've lived in the same Ohio town my whole life. The story I'm about to tell you happened last spring, at the engagement party for my grandson Thomas and a lovely young woman named Hannah Beaumont. The party was held at the Cedar Ridge Country Club, the kind of place with green awnings and valet parking and a wine list longer than my grocery receipt. I'd never set foot inside it before. Thomas had warned me it would be fancy. He didn't know how fancy I could be when I wanted to. I wore a charcoal suit I'd bought 12 years ago for my late husband's funeral and had altered 3 times since. Simple pearl earrings. The wedding band I still wear on my right hand because the left one feels presumptuous now that Daniel's been gone 8 years. Thomas picked me up at 4. He looked nervous in a way I hadn't seen since he was 16 and taking his driving test. "Grandma," he said, holding the car door for me, "the Beaumonts are real particular, just so you know." "I've met particular people before, sweetheart." He kissed my cheek, and I caught the smell of his aftershave, the cheap kind from the drugstore, and my heart pinched a little. My grandson is a master electrician. He owns his own van, his own toolkit, his own calloused hands. He's 28 years old, and he built his business out of nothing while still helping me carry groceries up the porch steps every Sunday after church. He had no business being nervous about anyone. We arrived at 5. The Beaumonts were already inside, holding court near the bar. Hannah's father, Richard Beaumont, was a tall, narrow-shouldered man in his early 60s with the kind of tan you don't get from working outside. His wife, Vivian, wore a pale green dress and a smile that seemed to be assembled in pieces. Hannah ran over and hugged Thomas, then hugged me. "She's a sweet girl. She teaches 2nd grade. I've liked her from the first Sunday Thomas brought her to dinner." The trouble started before the salad course. Richard had been drinking bourbon since before we arrived, and he'd reached that loose-mouth phase that men of his type seem to specialize in. He clinked his glass with a butter knife and stood up. "I'd like to say a few words," he announced, "about my future son-in-law." I felt Thomas go still beside me. "Tom here," Richard said, with a smile that did not include his eyes, "is what we call a self-made man. Or rather, a self-made boy. He wires houses for a living. Now, somebody's got to do it, I suppose." A few uncertain chuckles around the table. "My daughter could have had her pick. She had a finance major at Vanderbilt asking after her 2 years running. But she chose Tom, and I respect that. I do. I just want to make sure that Tom understands what he's marrying into." He looked directly at my grandson. "My daughter was raised in a house with 2 staircases. She had a horse named Pepper when she was 9. She summered on Mackinac Island. I'm not saying any of this to brag, son. I'm saying it because I want you to be realistic. A worthless tradesman with a pickup truck and a tool belt is not what we pictured for her. But here we are." He raised his glass. "To being realistic." The room got very quiet. Hannah's face went the color of skim milk. Vivian stared at her plate like she was trying to read a map on it. Thomas didn't move. He put both hands flat on the table, and I could see the tendons in his wrists. I took a sip of my water. I cut a piece of my chicken. I chewed it carefully. I swallowed. I did not look at Richard Beaumont. I did not look at anyone. Thomas leaned over and whispered, "Grandma, do you want to leave? Eat your dinner, honey. The chicken is very good." He looked at me with confusion, but he picked up his fork. We finished the meal. I made polite conversation with the woman on my left, who turned out to be Vivian's sister, and who couldn't quite meet my eye. When the cake came, I ate 2 bites and complimented the pastry chef. At 8:30, I stood up, thanked the Beaumonts for their hospitality, kissed Hannah on the cheek, and let Thomas drive me home. In the car, he was shaking. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I should have said something. I should have walked out." I just froze. Thomas Daniel Sullivan, you listen to me. You did not freeze. You showed character. A man who keeps his temper in a room full of fools is a man who knows what he's worth. He called me worthless in front of everyone. He called you a name. That isn't the same thing. Thomas drove the rest of the way in silence. When we pulled up to my little blue house on Linden Street, he walked me up the porch steps the way he always does. At the door, he kissed the top of my head. "I love you, Grandma." "I love you too, sweetheart. Now go home and get some sleep. Don't tell Hannah I said this, but you do not need to apologize for 1 second of who you are." I went inside. I locked the door. I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, which I almost never drink, and I sat in Daniel's old armchair, the one with the threadbare spot on the right arm where his hand used to rest, and I thought. I thought about Richard Beaumont's law firm, Beaumont, Hartwell, and Pratt, the biggest commercial practice in 3 counties. They handled real estate, contracts, business litigation. I knew this because I'd had to deal with them professionally twice over the last decade. They didn't know that, though. Richard Beaumont had no idea who I was. He'd looked at me at dinner and seen a small, gray-haired woman in a borrowed-looking suit. He'd looked at me and seen nothing at all. A patient woman is not a forgiving woman. She is just a woman who picks her moment. Most people in town who know me as Maggie Sullivan, retired school teacher, 31 years teaching 9th grade English at Westbrook High. That's true. I did do that. What people don't know, because Daniel and I never made any noise about it, is what happened with the land. When Daniel and I got married in 1981, his daddy gave us 40 acres of mostly worthless farmland on the north edge of the county. Scrub brush and a creek and a cattle pond that didn't hold water. We didn't farm it. We didn't develop it. We paid the taxes every year and let it sit. 40 acres of weeds. Then in 1997, the interstate spur came through. The land became valuable overnight. We had developers knocking on our door for the better part of a year. Daniel was a careful man, a high school football coach by trade, but careful with money in a way his coaching salary never gave him a chance to demonstrate. We sold off 10 acres for what was then a stunning amount of money. We invested most of it. We sold 10 more in 2004 to a hotel chain. We invested that too. Daniel died in 2017 of a heart attack at 61 years old, sitting in the bleachers watching a JV game. He never got to retire. He never got to take the trip to Ireland we'd been saving for. What he left me was a portfolio I never wanted, that I never knew quite what to do with, that grew steadily over the years through nobody's effort but the people I'd hired to manage it. I still live in the same house we bought in 1983. I still drive a 2009 Buick. I never told my son. I never told Thomas. I never told anybody. I did one thing with it. About 4 years ago, I started buying up commercial property in the older downtown district. Buildings the local landlords were tired of, that needed roof work and electrical updates and a tenant who actually paid rent. I bought them through a small holding company I set up with the help of a lawyer in Columbus, 2 hours away, where nobody would recognize my name. The holding company is called Linden Holdings for my street. By last spring, Linden Holdings owned 11 buildings downtown, including the 4-story brick office building at 211 Main Street. Beaumont, Hartwell, and Pratt occupied the entire top floor of 211 Main Street. I sipped my bourbon. I looked at the empty armchair across from me, the one Daniel used to read his Western paperbacks in. "What do you think, honey?" I said to the empty room. "Is it cruel?" I could almost hear him laughing. I did not sleep that night, and I did not act in haste. I want you to understand that. I'm not a woman who acts in haste. The next morning, I drove to the Cracker Barrel out on the highway, and I ate a plate of biscuits and gravy by myself, and I made a list on a paper napkin. I am old-fashioned about lists. I write them on paper and I throw them away when I'm done. The list had 3 things on it. 1. Find out what Richard Beaumont's lease situation was at 211 Main. 2. Find out what kind of man he was, beyond what I'd seen at the country club, because anyone can have a bad night. I needed to know if this was a bad night or a pattern. 3. Decide what I actually wanted. Did I want him punished? Did I want him humbled? Did I want him to know who I was? These are not the same questions, and I needed to be honest with myself about the answer before I did anything I couldn't take back. Have you ever had to wait to do the right thing because you weren't sure yet what the right thing was? Tell me about it down in the comments. I want to hear. The next 2 weeks, I did my homework. I called my property manager, a sharp young woman named Renee who handles the day-to-day for Linden Holdings, and I asked her to send me the lease for the top floor of 211 Main. She emailed it that afternoon. I read it twice. Beaumont, Hartwell, and Pratt had a 5-year lease that had been signed 2.5 years ago. There was a clause about annual rent adjustment tied to a market rate index. There was a clause about renewal terms. There was a clause about tenant conduct, fairly standard, prohibiting any conduct that would damage the reputation of the property or its other tenants. Boilerplate stuff. I made some notes. I called an old friend named Pat who used to teach in the room next to mine and who now does paralegal work. I asked her casually if she knew anyone who'd ever worked at Beaumont, Hartwell, and Pratt. She knew 3 people. 2 of them had left on good terms. One of them, a woman named Doris, had left in tears after 18 months as a legal secretary. I bought Doris lunch at the Olive Garden the next Thursday. Doris told me things. Richard Beaumont had a habit of belittling junior associates in front of clients. He had a habit of taking credit for other people's work. He had let go of a long-time receptionist for not laughing at one of his jokes. He told one paralegal, a young man whose father drove a city bus, that he should be grateful to even be in the building. None of this was illegal. None of it was actionable. It was just the residue of a particular kind of man. I drove home from the Olive Garden, and I knew what I wanted. I didn't want him destroyed. I didn't want him humiliated in public the way he'd humiliated my grandson. I wanted him to understand in his bones that the world he thought he ran was actually held up by people he considered beneath him. I wanted him to know that the small woman at the dinner table was the one he answered to, and I wanted him to know it in a way he could not respond to with bluster. Wherever you're listening from right now, I'd love to know. Tell me your town in the comments. I read every single one. 3 weeks after the engagement party, I made an appointment. I called the front desk at Beaumont, Hartwell, and Pratt myself, using my own name, and I asked to schedule a meeting with Mr. Beaumont about a property matter. The receptionist asked me what it concerned. I said it concerned 211 Main Street. She put me on hold for 40 seconds and then came back with an appointment for that Friday at 2 p.m. I dressed carefully Friday morning. The same charcoal suit, pearl earrings. I added a small gold pin that had belonged to my mother. I drove myself downtown, parked in the lot behind 211 Main, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and gave my name to the receptionist. She walked me back to Richard's corner office. He stood up when I walked in. He didn't recognize me. I watched the polite, professional smile arrange itself on his face. "Mrs. Sullivan, is it? Please, have a seat. I understand this is about your property at 211 Main." "Yes." I sat down. I crossed my ankles. I set my purse beside the chair. Although technically it's my company's property, I own Linden Holdings. There was a pause about the length of a breath. "Linden Holdings owns this building," he said slowly. "Yes, that's correct. Linden Holdings owns this building and 10 others downtown. I'm the sole owner and managing member." He sat down. He folded his hands on his desk. I watched the recognition begin to creep up his face, starting at the chin and working upward. I'd seen this expression on 1,000 ninth graders over the years. The expression of someone realizing the test is harder than they thought. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said carefully, "have we met before?" "We have. About 3 weeks ago. At the engagement party for your daughter and my grandson." He went very still. "You're Tom's grandmother." I am. He stopped. You started again. "Mrs. Sullivan, I owe you an apology. I had been drinking that evening, and I'm not here for an apology, Mr. Beaumont. I'm here on a business matter." He shut his mouth. I reached into my purse and took out a single piece of paper. I set it on his desk and slid it across to him. It was the rent adjustment clause from his lease, with one paragraph highlighted in yellow. "As you know," I said, "your firm's lease provides for an annual rent adjustment tied to the regional market rate index. Linden Holdings has not exercised that adjustment in either of the last 2 years. We've simply held the rent steady, as a courtesy to long-term tenants. I'm sure you appreciate that." "Yes, This year, we will be exercising the adjustment. According to the index, that will increase your annual rent by approximately 22%. He swallowed. "In addition," I went on, "the lease contains a tenant conduct clause. I'd like to read it to you." I took out a second sheet of paper. "Tenant and tenants' principals shall conduct themselves in all public and professional settings in a manner that does not bring disrepute upon the property or its other tenants." I set the paper down. I looked at him. Mr. Paper, Beaumont, you stood up at a private event at the Cedar Ridge Country Club in front of approximately 40 people, including 3 of your own firm's clients. Yes, I checked the guest list, and you described my grandson as a worthless tradesman. Several people at that event also lease space in buildings owned by Linden Holdings. The owners of 2 of those businesses have called me independently to express their distress at the comments you made. I'm in possession of a recording made by another guest of the toast in question. He had gone the color of putty. I am not going to terminate your lease, Mr. Beaumont. I am not going to sue you. I'm not even going to ask you to apologize to my grandson. He doesn't need your apology. He has my respect and his own, and that's a great deal more than most men ever have. Then what do you want? He said quietly. It was the first quiet thing I'd heard him say. I want 3 things. First, you will pay the adjusted rent on time, every month, for the remaining 2.5 years of your lease. Second, at the end of that lease, you will not be offered renewal. You'll have time to find new offices. I'd suggest the medical district. It's nice over there. Third, and this is the one that matters to me, you will think every day between now and the day you move out of this building about why you said what you said. You will think about whether you actually meant it, and you will think about the difference between worth and money. I'm not going to make you do anything about that thinking. I'm not going to demand any particular outcome. I'm just going to require that you do it, because every month when you write that rent check to Linden Holdings, you're going to remember who you wrote it to. He didn't say anything. He couldn't. I picked up my purse. I stood up. My grandson, Mr. Beaumont, can wire a house. He can install a service panel that will not catch fire and burn a family in their beds while they sleep. He can read a blueprint and find a problem that 3 other electricians missed. He has calloused hands and a clean conscience and 28 years of being raised right by his mother and his father, and when his father was killed in a car accident, by me. He is worth 10 of you, and I say that without anger. I say it as a simple fact about the world. I walked to the door. Have a good afternoon, Mr. Beaumont. Tell Vivian I said hello. She seems like a nice woman who has put up with a great deal. I shut the door behind me with what I hope was a fairly gentle click. I did not tell Thomas. I did not tell anyone. I drove home, made myself a tuna sandwich, and watched a rerun of Murder, She Wrote. My hands were not shaking. I was a little surprised by that. The wedding was supposed to be in October. In the weeks after my meeting with Richard, I watched my grandson carefully. He was hurt. He tried to hide it, but he was hurt. He had stopped asking about Hannah's parents, which was its own kind of answer. Hannah herself was quieter than I'd ever seen her. She came to my house one Saturday in June, alone, and helped me weed the back garden and didn't talk for a long time. Finally, kneeling in the dirt, she said, "Mrs. Sullivan, did my dad really say what he said?" "You were there, honey. I know. I was there. But I keep thinking I must have misheard, or that he didn't mean it the way it sounded. He's been so strange since the party. He's barely speaking to me. He told my mom he's been having trouble sleeping." I tugged a dandelion out by the root and tossed it in the bucket. "Hannah, has your father ever said anything like that to you about Thomas? Privately?" She didn't answer for a long time. "Sometimes," she said. "He says I'm being naive. He says love doesn't pay a mortgage. He says I'm wasting my potential." "And what do you say?" She started to cry. Quietly, the way some girls learn to cry when they grew up in a house where loud feelings were inconvenient. I say I love Tom, and then I go to my room and I'm not sure of anything. I sat back on my heels. I looked at this girl. She was 26 years old. She loved my grandson, and she was also her father's daughter, and those 2 things were pulling at her like a rope in a tug of war. I'd seen this in students for 31 years. The kids who came in scared of their fathers usually grew up to either run from the fear or marry it. I didn't yet know which one Hannah was. "Honey," I said, "I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I will tell you that Thomas is a whole man. He doesn't need to be rescued. He doesn't need to be defended. He just needs to be loved by somebody who actually sees him. If you can be that person, he'll be the luckiest man in 3 states. If you can't, you owe it to both of you to walk away now while it would only hurt for a year. Don't marry him out of guilt because of what your father did." and don't leave him out of fear of what your father might do." She wiped her face on the back of her gardening glove and left a streak of dirt on her cheek. "How do I know which one I am?" "You'll know," I said. "Give it time. It'll show up." In August, Hannah broke off the engagement. She did it the right way, as right as any wrong way can be done. She came to Thomas's apartment, alone, and she sat with him on his ugly tan couch, and she told him she couldn't do it. She said she loved him. She said she was afraid she didn't love him enough to be the wife he deserved. She said she was 26 and she didn't yet know how to be her own person separate from her father, and she didn't want to marry Thomas while she was still figuring that out. Thomas told me all of this 2 days later, sitting at my kitchen table, eating a slice of pound cake he wasn't tasting. "She did the right thing, Grandma. I keep thinking about it and I keep coming back to that. She did the right thing. His voice broke. He set down his fork. "I just thought she was the one. Maybe she was the one to teach you something important. That doesn't always mean she was the one to marry." He cried then. My 28-year-old grandson, with his thick electrician's forearms and his stubble, cried at my kitchen table over a piece of pound cake, and I let him. I did not say a single comforting thing. I just sat with him. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for somebody is not try to fix it. When he was done, he wiped his nose on a paper towel and looked at me. "Grandma, you've been awful quiet about her dad." "About what he said at the party." "Have I?" "Yeah. You haven't said a single bad word about him." I shrugged. "What would be the point?" "I don't know. I just thought you'd be more upset." I looked at my grandson for a long moment. I thought about telling him. I thought about telling him everything. The land, the buildings, the meeting in Richard's office, the lease, the rent. I thought about how he would look at me, the woman he'd known his whole life as Grandma Maggie, who lived in the little blue house and drove the old Buick, and how that look would change. I decided he didn't need to know. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He didn't need to be defended by his grandmother any more than he'd already been quietly defended. He was a man. He'd want to fight his own battles. Telling him about mine would diminish his. "Sweetheart," I said, "some battles aren't yours to fight. Some have already been fought, and the only thing left is for you to live well. That's what you do now. You live well. That's the only thing that ever actually beats a man like Richard Beaumont. Living well in spite of him, without him, with your hands and your conscience and your good name." He nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." The next 8 months were a stretch of ordinary days. Thomas threw himself into work. He hired a second electrician, a young man named Marcus, and bought a second van. He went on a couple of dates, none that took. He started running again, 3 mornings a week, the way he had in high school. He came over for Sunday dinner every week. He looked gradually like himself again. Hannah moved to Cincinnati in October, took a teaching job at a charter school, and started over. She sent me a Christmas card. I sent her one back. Richard Beaumont paid his adjusted rent on the 1st of every month. Renee told me he was now signing the checks personally instead of having his accountant do it. I didn't know what to make of that. In April, almost a year to the day after the engagement party, I got a phone call from Vivian Beaumont. "Mrs. Kemble Sullivan," she said, "I wonder if I could buy you a cup of coffee." We met at a little place downtown that I owned, though she didn't know it. She was thinner than I remembered. She'd cut her hair short. "I'm leaving Richard," she said, before her coffee had even arrived. "I filed papers last week. I wanted you to know. I didn't say anything. He's been a different man since that meeting with you. He told me about it. Did you know that? About a month after it happened, he came home one night and he told me everything. He cried. I hadn't seen him cry since his mother died." She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. "He didn't change, Mrs. Sullivan. That's the thing. He felt sorry for himself. He felt scared. He felt smaller. But he didn't change. He just learned to be ashamed in private. And I've been married to him for 34 years, and I realized I have spent the last 20 of them being polite about a man I do not respect." "I'm sorry, Vivian." "I'm not. I'm tired. There's a difference between sorry and tired." She drank her coffee. "Hannah's doing better, I think. She tells me about her students. She doesn't ask about Tom, but she keeps a picture of him on her phone. I've seen it. He's doing better too. I'm glad. She looked at me with watery, tired eyes. Mrs. Sullivan, I want to thank you. I know that's a strange thing to say, but what you did, however quietly you did it, was the first time anyone in our family ever said no to him, not even me. I just want you to know that some part of me has been waiting 34 years for somebody to say no to him. I'm sorry it wasn't me. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. It's not too late, honey, she smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. No, I suppose it isn't. Thomas met Sarah in June of this year. She's a nurse at the regional hospital. She grew up in a town smaller than ours. Her father is a long-haul trucker and her mother runs a beauty shop out of the converted garage. When Thomas brought her to Sunday dinner for the first time, she walked in carrying a Tupperware of her grandmother's potato salad and said, "Mrs. Sullivan, Tom's told me so much about you, and I have to ask, is it true you taught freshman English for 31 years? Because that is heroic work." I liked her immediately. They got engaged on Christmas Eve. The wedding is going to be next September at the Methodist Church on Walnut Street, with the reception at the VFW Hall. Sarah's mother is making the cake. Thomas is paying for everything else himself. He told me, "Grandma, no fancy country clubs. Just people who actually like each other." I told him that sounded about right. Richard Beaumont's firm moved out of 211 Main Street last month when the lease ended. They relocated to a smaller building on the south end of downtown. I drove past their old offices the day after they left. The space is being rented to a women's medical clinic on a generous below-market lease. I made the lease generous on purpose. I never told Thomas. I never told anyone. The only person who ever knew the full story was Daniel's old armchair, and I keep meaning to give that chair away to charity, but somehow I never quite do. If you're listening to this and you are a grandmother, or a mother, or a sister, or a daughter, or anyone who has ever sat at a table and let an unworthy man's words slide past you while you ate your chicken and waited, I want you to know something. Your silence at that table was not your defeat. Your silence at that table was your choice. There is a difference. And the woman who knows that difference is a woman the world should be very careful with. I'm going to go finish my coffee now. The garden needs weeding. Tom is coming for Sunday dinner, and Sarah's bringing a peach cobbler. The sun is shining. The buildings on Main Street are full of tenants who pay their rent and treat their neighbors right. Somewhere on the south end of town, a man is signing a check and remembering the way I asked him to. That's all the revenge I ever wanted. Have you ever stayed quiet when you could have spoken because the quiet was stronger? Tell me about it. I'll read every word. God bless you. Take care of the people you love, and don't ever let anyone make you smaller than you are. I've been thinking a lot lately about what really happened between Richard Beaumont and me, and I want to be honest with you about something. None of what unfolded was magic. None of it was luck. It was cause and effect, plain as a kitchen recipe. Richard Beaumont stood up at that country club and made a choice with his mouth. He chose to use his words like a hammer on a young man whose only crime was working with his hands. And every choice we make sets the next one in motion, whether we see it coming or not. He didn't see me coming. He didn't see me because he trained himself, over decades, not to look at people he considered small. That blindness wasn't bad luck. It was a habit, and habits cash their checks eventually. I want to tell you what I learned sitting in my Buick in the parking lot of his law firm that Friday afternoon before I went inside. I learned that strength isn't loud. The loudest man at the table is almost never the strongest one. Real strength sits down, finishes its chicken, drives itself home, and thinks. Real strength asks questions before it acts. Real strength chooses the moment instead of being chosen by it. I had decades of being underestimated to teach me that. Daniel taught me some of it. The ninth graders taught me the rest. You cannot teach English to 14-year-olds for 31 years without learning that the quietest girl in the back row is often the one who'll outlive you all. I want my grandson Thomas to grow into the kind of man who measures his worth by his own ruler, not by anybody else's. I want him to keep his calluses and his clean conscience and his honest van and his open Sunday afternoons. I want Hannah to find herself wherever she is now and to know that walking away was its own kind of bravery. And I'll tell you the truth about Richard because I owe you the truth. I don't hate him. Hate is a heavy thing to carry, and I'm too old to carry it. I just wanted him to face the simple arithmetic of what he'd done. He sowed contempt at a dinner table and he reaped a rent check every month for 30 months. That's not revenge, that's bookkeeping. If you take anything from my story, I'd like it to be this. Build something. Build it quietly. Build it without bragging. Build your character. Build your skill. Build your small good habits. Build a life that doesn't need anyone's approval to stand up. And when somebody tries to make you small, you don't have to shout. You don't have to fight. You just have to keep building. Keep your dignity in your own pocket where no one can spend it for you. Be patient, be smart, be willing to wait a long time for the right moment, and then, when it comes, speak once, calmly, and let your life do the rest of the talking. That's all any of us has in the end, and it's enough. It has always been enough.